Welcome to All Pro Football Data. My name is Jim Coburn, and today's episode, we're talking about the New York Giants 2024 NFL Draft Class based on data. So, we're going to look at every single pick they made, we're going to grade each pick, and we're going to look at their production, their athleticism, and other statistical factors to determine how well they did in this particular draft class. Now, in terms of my grading system, what I use is data grades. So if you want to learn more about my data grades, you can go to my top 50 prospects video where I go into great detail in terms of everything with the data. But I look at a couple things. First off is draft pick approximate value. This is the average value for a player taken at the spot they're taken. So this is typically how those prospects have performed from 1994 until 2023 in terms of their approximate value score. So if you just randomly picked a player in the top five, you would get a player who had a 98 percentile production score at the NFL level. And then as you see, as you go down the list, you start to get lower and lower and lower, which just kind of shows you how the draft is. Typically, the best players are picked early, and the worst players are picked towards the end of the draft, or at least the players that don't get the opportunities to start. Now, in terms of other things like the data grade, I use something called EAV. It's expected approximate value. It takes a look at the production, the athleticism, the physical metrics, every single statistic you could think of. It's kind of like a RAS score, but instead of just looking at athleticism, it's looking at every single detail of a player. Every stone is turned in terms of the data grade. So that is what I use in terms of evaluation. I think it's correlative. I've done videos on how correlative it is. It's not 100% correlative, but it is pretty darn close to being a very good metric to use in terms of prospect evaluation. So when I say a player didn't score well in their data grade, they're likely not going to become a long-term starter, especially if they were below average in terms of their data grade. So we're going to look at these picks. We're going to grade them based on this system. And also in terms of limiting factors. So these are the things that can affect the scoring of the prospect. So the coaching of a team can affect it. Injuries, the media market can happen. You can have a player who gets inflated in terms of their value. There are certain players who also get by name recognition, for example. So they're players that everybody knows. So they just keep voting them in, even though their play might have diminished over time, but people just know the name, so they vote for the player. Substitution bias is another thing that can affect things, and also physical and mental makeup of a player. You can kind of read this if you want to kind of get a better idea about that. Next up, let's get to the Giants' needs. So this is the Giants roster prior to the draft in terms of what they had. These are the top players they had, and this is based on their NFL positional value. Not this is based on how they actually played, not necessarily about what their overall ability is as a prospect. So as you can see, not a whole lot of really deep dark green players. And there are some three yellows. So guard and center and nickel cornerback are players that haven't really performed that well for them, for them, and they're definitely positions that they probably should target. Now, based on this list right here, I came up with these needs. These are the needs of the New York Giants based on their approximate value score. It's not based on their data score. It's based on how their prospects have actually performed. There is a chance that some of the players might outperform their data grades. So I don't really look towards data grades to do this. I just look at how they actually have done on the football field, and this is what I've seen. Running back is definitely a need. Offensive line is a huge need for the Giants. When you get to the defensive side of the football, defensive tackle and safety seem to be the big needs for them. So we're going to be looking at this draft class to see did they fill these needs? Because this is how I grade draft classes. I look at okay, did they meet their roster needs? The biggest needs that I could identify based on the data work that I've done is they need a running back, they need offensive line, they need safety, they need quarterback, and they need wide receiver. Did they draft good prospects? This is another thing that I think is really important because just because you draft a safety, if he's not a good safety, you're going to be drafting another one pretty soon. So that's going to be something to kind of look at. And then, of course, did they draft prospects that had the data potential to outperform their draft status? This is where I grade draft grade grade draft classes a little bit better than everybody else based on my statistics is because I'm looking at okay, are they able to outperform their draft status? Because the vast majority of long-term starting players typically had above average data grades. So if you're not drafting that guy in the late round where there already is such a small window for a starter to come out of that area, then what are you doing? You're just adding a camp body, and I just think that's ridiculous to just draft players just to sit in training camp and not really get a real opportunity to start for the job. You need to compete. You need to have some competition, okay? You need to have competition on these football teams. So now, starting with pick number one, and Malik Neighbors, wide receiver out of LSU. His data grade was 99.95 out of 100. His projected floor grade is 88. Balance grade is 93.97. And his pick AV is 97.68 out of 100 with an overall pick grade of a A. Very great pick. He was a generational wide receiver prospect, and here's why. So when you take a look at his offensive market share production scores, he had elite receiving market share, elite total offensive market share, and above average touchdown market share for his position. On top of that, when you look at his efficiency scores, he did really well in terms of his efficiency, 90 plus percentile almost in terms of his yards per reception, with 80 plus percentile in terms of his TD percentage. So even though he didn't have the best touchdown market share at LSU, he was a guy who did consistently get in the end zone at a really high rate when you gave him the football. So that definitely is an area where he did really well. Then of course you get to athleticism traits. So this is based on LSU's Pro Day. He had a 95 percentile speed score and a 92 percentile excuse me, 95 percentile explosion score and 92 percentile in terms of speed. Didn't do the short shuttle and three cone to determine his flexibility, but this is how he tested in terms of this particular area. And then, of course, we get to adjusted production traits. This is by far the most important production metric to really look at because this is the basic thing. Everybody tells me every single year, did you see where he played at? Played at Alabama, man. Played at Clemson, man. He played at these high level schools, man. Yeah, he's a good player. Just he played at a really good school. This is what this looks like, okay? It looks to see how he performed for his level of competition, how he performed for the team that he was on, and all those other sort of metrics, okay? Based on this, fantastic. 99 percentile in terms of age, 98 percentile in terms of MSA rating, and his pass rating was 99 percentile. Why? Because he was extremely productive and he did it at LSU. Okay? So that's why he scored so well in that. Next up, we get to pick 47, Tyler Nubin, safety out of Minnesota. His data grade is 82.60. His floor grade is 72.46, with a balanced grade of 77.53 out of 100. His pick AV is 83.01. Overall pick grade, I would give a B. Now, I know there's a lot of fans of Tyler Nubin in this particular draft class, but I do have some concerns with him. When you look at his production, 71 percentile solo tackles, 96 percentile interceptions, and 71 percentile in terms of pass deflection. This is a good profile for a starter, but it's not really elite in every single metric. In terms of solo tackles, it's kind of a little bit below the All-Pro averages at the position. And then when you get to the athleticism testing, Tyler Nubin did not do so hot. 46 percentile in terms of explosiveness, 56 percentile in terms of speed, and then 33 percentile in terms of flexibility for his size. When you look at the starter averages, the Pro Bowl averages, and the All Pro averages at the position, he doesn't quite hit the speed score you would like, nor the flexibility score you would like. And flexibility essentially is like change of direction skills, is what that deals with. So he's a slightly above average safety with below average change of direction skills. Sounds like a problem, but we'll see. We'll see what happens with him. Now he did have good adjusted production scores. His age was good, his pass rating was good. Pass rating, deals with production for his level of competition and the team that he was on. So those are good for him. But overall, I'd give this grade a B. He does have the potential to be a starter. I just don't believe that he has the potential to become a high quality starter. But we'll see what happens with him. Next up, we get to pick number 70, and Andrew Phillips, cornerback out of Kentucky. His data grade is 42.48. His projected floor is 41.64, and his balance grade is 42.06 with a pick AV of 74.90 out of 100. Overall pick grade is an F. It's an F because he has a very low data grade. It's also a F when you look at the AV score for him. So taking a look at defensive market share data for him, uh, not the best in terms of his production. And then, of course, when you look at his uh, pass deflection data, also not that impressive for him as well. Taking a look at athleticism testing, 97 percentile in terms of explosion, with above average speed and average flexibility for his size. He tested like a zone corner athletically, and his athleticism is his best trait. If you just drafted him based on athleticism, I wouldn't be complaining too much. But based on his production traits and his other sort of traits, especially in terms of his adjusted production traits, his pass score and his age score are really not where you want to be in terms of a long-term corner. So it's very unlikely that Andrew Phillips becomes a long-term starter. But again, we shall see. As they always say, wait till they play football, right? Now, then we get to pick 107 and Theo Johnson, tight end out of Penn State. His data grade is 74.41 out of 100. His projected floor is 38.16. Balance grade is 56.29. Pick AV is 57.53. I would give this grade pick C. Based on his production traits, didn't really do that well in terms of production overall. Efficiency, he did well in terms of TD percentage, so he is somebody who, if he was given the ball a little bit more, he might have scored more touchdowns. Then, of course, when you get to athleticism traits, he was by far the best tight end athlete in this class, 98 percentile explosion, 94 percentile speed, and 92 percentile flexibility for his size. That's the biggest reason why you would draft him, is to maybe capitalize on his athleticism, because tight ends don't necessarily need to have the best production. Usually, if they just have really great athleticism, they could develop into something. So we'll see if that's the case for Theo Johnson. And then, of course, in terms of his adjusted production traits, didn't quite hit the starter averages, Pro Bowl averages, or all pro averages at the position in terms of that. But again, we shall see what happens with him. Then we get to pick 166 and Tyrone Tracy Jr., running back out of Purdue. His data grade is 72.63 out of 100. His floor is 38.08. Balance grade is 55.36 with a pick AV of 52.90 out of 100. Overall pick grade I would give is a C. Taking a look at his offensive market share production scores, 95 percentile in terms of his receiving market share, but 35 percentile in terms of total offensive market share, and then his TD market share was 45 percentile, not the number that you want to hit. Taking a look at efficiency scores, he had 60 percentile in terms of his yards per touch, and his TD percentage was also about the 60 percentile in terms of that particular area. But the biggest selling point for him, honestly, is his athleticism traits. He was one of the best testing running backs in this class in terms of athleticism. 87.32 in terms of explosion, 73 percentile in terms of speed, and then 93.68 in terms of flexibility for his size. So great athlete overall. Not as good as Saquon Barkley, of course, as an athlete, but decent all-around athlete for him. But when he gets his adjusted production traits, this is where things kind of fall off a cliff for him. His age score, he had a third percentile age score. So he's one of the oldest running backs to come out in the draft in a very long time. 64 percentile in terms of MSA, and then 43 percentile in terms of pass. This is a class that had a lot of really old running backs. Ray Davis is another one that tested really low in terms of age. Blake Watson, another back who also had a very high age score. So we'll see what happens. I think he fell to the right place, though, to test this theory out, because he fell to a team that desperately needs a running back. So he might end up becoming the starter there. Whether long term or not, we'll have to see. But I think he's going to be a good test case to put the age thing to the test, to see if that's the case, even though it is a great opportunity for him. So we'll see what happens to Tracy Jr., but overall, his data profile doesn't really profile as a starter as much as sort of a backup rotational back. Then, of course, we get to the last pick for the Giants in Darius Muasau, or Muasau, linebacker from UCLA. His data grade is 59.03 out of 100. Projected floor is 29.64 with a balance grade of 44.33 out of 100. Pick AV is 10.04 out of 100, and his overall grade would be a F, mainly because his data grade is so low and he was drafted so low. And typically, prospects that test like this don't go on to become long-term starters. When you have that low of a data grade at that low of a round, you're probably not going to do so hot. Now, he does have some interesting data. His market share production as a linebacker wasn't that fantastic, but his other linebacker scores in terms of pass deflection market share and interception market share, kind of uh, pass defender ability was decent. But then when you look at athleticism traits, he had a 60 percentile explosion score with below average speed and below average flexibility. So He tested good as a pass defending linebacker, but didn't quite have man ability in terms of his athleticism traits. So it'll be interesting. He could be like a zone linebacker in terms of pass coverage. We'll see what happens with that, but that's kind of my feeling on him based on his data profile. And then, of course, when you get to adjusted production traits, he had a 50 percentile age score, 57 percentile MSA, and the 52 percentile in terms of his pass score. So adjusted production, he wasn't very productive to begin with. So then when you add in the fact that he's a little bit older, and his production isn't that great, he's not really going to test well here. Overall, though, I would give the New York Giants draft class the final grade of a C. Did they meet their roster needs? I would say yes and no. They didn't address their needs in a very clean way. So they drafted a running back in Tyrone Tracy Jr., who could fill their need at running back, but he also is extremely old and his production was inconsistent. They drafted a safety who had good production traits, but his athleticism could make him a liability in coverage. So they drafted a lot of prospects that fill needs that could be good players, but there's some question marks there. Overall, when I finally graded them, the Giants had a 28 out of 32 team draft class in terms of value and talent. I think the additions of Malik Neighbors, especially, I mean, Malik Neighbors is going to be a generational wide receiver talent. There's no doubt in my mind that that's what he's going to be, and it's going to be great for you guys. I think you guys are going to really enjoy Malik Neighbors. But I think when you look at the draft class as a whole, it's going to be Malik Neighbors and then a bunch of other dudes that you're probably not going to remember in 4 to 5 years. I mean, we'll see, but that's my general feeling on it based on data. Not my opinion, but just based on what the data says about them based on past performances from other prospects in the past. So, with all that stuff out of the way, thank you guys so much for watching. Check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/jcoburn. Check out my ex formerly known as Twitter account at Geometrics. And thank you guys so much for watching. Purchase the 2024 NFL Draft Analytics Guide available today for purchase. Link is in the description for that. And I will see you guys in the next episode. Peace.